They say blood is thicker than water. For 20 years, I thought that was the biggest lie ever told. 20 years, my own son, Daniel, treated me like I was less than a ghost. He wouldn't take my calls. He returned my letters unopened. He acted like I had died and simply forgotten to lie down. Then one Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. It was him. And do you know why he called after 2 decades of silence? It wasn't because he missed his old man. It was because he'd seen my name in a business journal. He invited me to Christmas. And God help me, I accepted. But I didn't go to reconcile. I went to deliver a lesson they would never forget. The silence of an empty house is a funny thing. It's not just the absence of noise. It's a presence. It's a weight in the air, a constant companion that sits with you at the dinner table and lies next to you in bed. For 20 years, that silence was the loudest thing in my life. Its name was Daniel, my son. The fight that broke us wasn't a single explosive event. It was more like a dam bursting after years of cracks. I was a structural engineer, a man who believed in foundations and support beams. I worked hard, maybe too hard. My company, Vance & Son Engineering, was my life's work. I poured everything into it, my time, my savings, the mortgage on our home. My wife, Eleanor, God rest her soul, she understood. She knew I was building a legacy for Daniel. But Daniel, he saw it differently. He saw a father who missed his baseball games and was too tired for weekend fishing trips. The final crack appeared in 2005. The market took a nosedive. A major project we had invested everything in went belly up. The client, a big developer named Marcus Thorne, declared bankruptcy, and our invoices became worthless paper. We were ruined. We lost the company. We lost the house I'd built with my own hands, the house Daniel grew up in. Every brick held a memory, and watching the bank put a lock on that front door felt like they were locking away my heart. Eleanor, my sweet Eleanor, her health had been fragile for a while. The stress, the shame of it all, it was too much for her heart. She passed away 6 months after we moved into a cramped 2-bedroom rental apartment that smelled of damp and defeat. The funeral was the last time I saw the light in Daniel's eyes. It was replaced by a cold, hard fury. We stood by her graveside, the air thick with unspoken grief and a drizzle that felt like heaven itself was weeping. When we got back to the apartment, he finally let it out. "This is your fault," he spat, his voice shaking with a rage that terrified me. "All of it. You and your obsession. You were never a husband to her. You were a CEO. You weren't a father, you were a boss. You gambled our home, you gambled her life, and you lost. Daniel's son, it was a business risk." I started, my voice hoarse. "Don't you son me," he roared, his face inches from mine. "She needed you. I needed you. You were too busy chasing contracts and shaking hands with crooks like Thorne to see your wife was dying. You killed her just as surely as if you'd held a pillow over her face." The words hit me harder than any fist. They shattered something deep inside me. I tried to explain, to defend myself, but he was a wall of grief and blame. He was 25 years old, newly married to a woman, Sarah, who I always felt looked at us with a kind of mild disdain, as if we were a project she was undertaking. She stood behind him, her hand on his arm, her expression a mask of performative sympathy. That day he walked out of that apartment. He told me he never wanted to see me again. He said I was dead to him, and for the next 20 years, he kept his promise. I tried. Lord, how I tried. I called. I wrote letters. For the first few years, I'd send birthday cards, Christmas cards. They all came back, stamped, returned to sender. I heard through the grapevine when his children were born, my grandchildren, a boy, Liam, then a girl, Chloe. I was a grandfather, and I might as well have been a man on the moon. I'd see pictures Sarah posted online, her profile public for all the world to see her perfect family. A handsome son, a beautiful wife, 2 smiling children in matching Christmas sweaters, a perfect life, with one inconvenient piece edited out. Me. So I learned to live with the silence. I took odd jobs, handyman work, anything to pay the bills. I was 58, broke, and a widower estranged from his only child. The weight of it all was crushing. The silence was my penance. Every creak of the floorboards in my lonely apartment was a reminder of Daniel's last words. Every holiday spent alone was a testament to my failure. The silence wasn't just an absence of him, it was a constant, screaming reminder of everything I had lost. The first 5 years after Eleanor's death were a blur of grief and grit. I worked until my bones ached, saved every penny, and lived a life as gray and grim as the concrete I used to pour. The fire in my belly, the engineer's spark that loved to solve problems, had been extinguished by loss. Or so I thought. One winter, I was working a miserable job patching up a crumbling retaining wall for a community garden. The city's budget was a joke, and the materials they gave me were second-rate. The cold was brutal, and every night I'd come home with my hands raw and my spirit lower than the temperature. I watched the patches I made crack and fail within weeks. It was a Sisyphean task, a perfect metaphor for my life. One night, shivering in my small apartment, staring at a hairline fracture spreading across my ceiling, something in my old brain flickered to life. The problem wasn't just the cheap concrete mix. It was the inflexibility of the material itself. Concrete is strong under compression, but terrible under tension. It cracks. It's brittle. What if it didn't have to be? For the first time in years, I felt a familiar surge of excitement. I went to the library not to get warm, but to read. I pulled out my old textbooks, dusted off 20 years of rust from my mind, and got to work. My apartment kitchen became a makeshift laboratory. I bought a second-hand industrial mixer with my meager savings. I experimented with polymers, with recycled fibers, with different aggregate compositions. The place was a mess of dust and strange chemical smells. My landlord, Mr. Henderson, threatened to evict me more than once. I called my creation Flexicrete. It was a cementitious composite, but with a crucial difference. It had a high polymer content and was reinforced with a specific type of recycled microfiber. The result was a material with the compressive strength of high-grade concrete, but with remarkable tensile strength and flexibility. You could bend a thin sheet of it. It wouldn't shatter under impact. It would deform and absorb the energy. It was cheaper to produce, used recycled materials, and was 1,000 times more durable for repair work in earthquake-prone zones. I poured my entire life into it. Every dollar I had went into refining the formula and filing the patents. I lived on instant noodles and canned soup. I remember one particularly low point, sitting in my dusty kitchen at 3 a.m., a failed batch cooling in a bucket, my bank account down to its last two-digit number. Daniel's voice echoed in my head. You gambled everything and you lost. I nearly gave up. I looked at Eleanor's picture on the wall, her gentle smile a beacon in my dingy apartment. I'm not gambling this time, Ellie, I whispered. This is for you. This is redemption. It took 3 more years of relentless work before I got my break. I used a small batch of Flexicrete to fix a notoriously cracked public staircase near a university campus, doing it for free in the middle of the night. An engineering professor, a Dr. Eris Thorne, no relation to the crook Marcus, thankfully, noticed the repair. He saw that it withstood a brutal winter freeze-thaw cycle without so much as a hairline fracture. He was intrigued. He found me through the local hardware store where I bought my supplies. Dr. Thorne and his university tested my product. The results were, in his words, revolutionary. From there, things moved at a speed that was dizzying for a man my age. The university helped me secure investors. We started a small production facility. The first major contract was with the state's Department of Transportation to repair bridges. They found that using Flexicrete extended the life of the repairs by 400% and cut costs by 60%. The dominoes fell fast after that. Licensing deals, international distribution, articles in engineering journals, then business magazines, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal. From broke to billions, Arthur Vance's concrete revolution. It was surreal. One day I was worried about my heating bill. The next, my accountant was talking about tax shelters and investment portfolios. I didn't change my life much. I bought a comfortable modern house, but not a mansion. I hired a housekeeper because I was tired of cleaning. I bought good tools for my workshop, but I still wore the same brand of work boots, still drank my coffee black, and still found the most peace when I was tinkering with some new idea. The money was abstract. It was validation, yes, it was security, but it was also hollow. Every success was tinged with a bitter thought. Does Daniel see this? Does he care? I never reached out. The ball was in his court. I had been the one rejected, and my pride, stubborn and old as it was, wouldn't let me beg for my son's attention. And then, one Tuesday afternoon in late October, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number with an area code from the affluent suburb where I knew he lived. My heart hammered against my ribs. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Hello?" I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside. A hesitant pause. "Dad?" 20 years. 20 years I had longed to hear that single word. But hearing it now, it didn't sound like the plea of a long-lost son. It sounded calculated. It sounded like an angle. "Daniel," I said, my voice flat. "Wow, hi. It's been a long time," he stammered. He sounded nervous, a man walking on eggshells. "Listen, I know this is out of the blue, completely, but well, Sarah and we were talking. We saw an article about your company, FlexiCrete. That's incredible, Dad. Really?" I said nothing. The silence stretched, and this time I was the one in control of it. "Anyway," he rushed on, "the reason I'm calling, Christmas is coming up, and the kids, Liam and Chloe, they've never met their grandfather. Sarah and we want to fix that. We want you to come for Christmas, spend a week with us. Please, Dad. It's time to let bygones be bygones. Life's too short." Life's too short. The same sentiment I'd screamed in my head for 2 decades. Hearing it from him now, coated in a syrupy false sincerity, made my stomach turn. He wasn't calling to apologize for the years of pain, for the accusations, for abandoning me in my grief. He was calling because his broke old dad was suddenly a multimillionaire. He smelled money, and he was putting on a show. A cold, hard resolve settled in my chest. It was a feeling I recognized from my engineering days. The moment you stop looking at a problem with emotion and start looking at it with cold, hard logic. He wanted a show? Fine. I would give him the performance of a lifetime. "Daniel," I said, letting a weary, forgiving sigh travel down the phone line. "I'd like that very much. I'd like to meet my grandchildren." "That's great. That's amazing," he gushed, the relief in his voice sickeningly palpable. We made the arrangements. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in a long time, the silence in my house wasn't empty. It was filled with the whirring of gears in my mind. The engineer was back at his drafting table. I wasn't just planning a Christmas visit. I was designing a structure, a trap, and it was going to be perfectly, beautifully, unforgivingly sound. My first call after hanging up with Daniel wasn't to a travel agent. It was to a man named Michael Corrigan. Michael was a private investigator, a former detective with eyes that had seen the worst of human nature and a demeanor that was as reassuring as it was intimidating. I had used his firm for some corporate due diligence, vetting potential partners and sniffing out industrial espionage. Now I needed him to investigate my own son. The irony was as bitter as day-old coffee. "Arthur," Michael said over the phone, his voice a low, gravelly hum. "Good to hear from you. What can I do for you? Another patent thief to chase down?" "Something a little more personal, Michael," I replied. "I need a full financial and lifestyle workup on my son, Daniel Vance, and his wife, Sarah Vance." There was a brief pause. Michael was a professional. He didn't pry into the why, only the what. "Understood. You want the full picture? Assets, debts, social standing, the works?" "Everything," I said, my voice hard. "I want to know what car he drives, what country club he belongs to, what his mortgage looks like, and what his credit card statements say. I want to know who their friends are and what they say about them. I want to know if this sudden family reunion is a Christmas miracle or a corporate takeover. Be discreet. Discretion is my middle name, Arthur. I'll have a preliminary report for you within a week." That week was one of the longest of my life. I went about my days overseeing operations at FlexiCrete, meeting with lawyers to finalize my estate planning, a task that now had a renewed and terrible urgency. But my mind was elsewhere. Part of me, a small, foolish, fatherly part, prayed that Michael's report would come back clean, that Daniel was genuinely successful, that his call was driven by a true change of heart, a late-blooming conscience. It was a sliver of hope I didn't even know I had until I felt the fear of it being extinguished. A week later, a plain manila envelope marked confidential arrived at my office. I waited until I was home, sitting in the quiet of my study with a glass of whiskey before I opened it. The contents were methodical, clinical, and utterly devastating to that last shred of hope. Michael's report was more than thorough. It was a forensic autopsy of a life built on sand. Daniel and Sarah were living a lie, and an expensive one at that. The photos showed a sprawling 5-bedroom house in a gated community, 2 luxury German cars in the driveway, and social media posts filled with ski trips to Aspen and beach vacations in the Caribbean. Sarah's blog, which Michael had gained access to, portrayed her as a high society matriarch, juggling charity events and raising her 2 perfect angels. But the numbers told a different story. The house was mortgaged to the hilt, and they had taken out a second mortgage, a high-interest, desperate kind of loan. They were 3 months behind on the payments. The cars were leased, and the payments were delinquent. Their credit card debt was staggering, spread across a dozen cards, most of them maxed out. Michael had included printouts of their statements, thousands of dollars spent at designer boutiques, 5-star restaurants, and the pro shop at the Oak Ridge Heritage Golf and Country Club, a club where their membership was, according to Michael's source, on probationary review due to unpaid dues. Daniel's career was a facade. He was listed as a senior vice president of development at a boutique real estate firm. In reality, it was a commission-based job, and he hadn't closed a significant deal in over 2 years. The market was tough, but Daniel's problem was more fundamental. He was selling a lifestyle he couldn't afford himself. The most damning piece of evidence was a series of emails Michael had managed to recover from their deleted trash folder. Emails between Daniel and Sarah from 6 months prior, right after the first Forbes article about me was published. Sarah: "Did you see this? Is this your father? Arthur Vance? It has to be." Daniel: "Holy hell, yes, that's him. The old bastard finally did it." Sarah: "What are you going to do?" "This changes everything, Danny. Everything. Think about the kids' tuition. Think about the house." Daniel: "I don't know. He probably hates me. I said some awful things." Sarah: "He's an old man. Old men are lonely. They want to see their grandchildren. You are his only son, his only heir. You have to call him. Swallow your pride, for God's sake. We are drowning here. This is a lifeline from God." Reading those words felt like swallowing glass. A lifeline from God. They didn't see me as a father. They saw me as an ATM, a bailout, a solution to the mess they had made of their own lives. Their greed was so naked, so shameless. The 20 years of silence wasn't a tragedy to them. It was an inconvenience, a prideful stance that was no longer financially viable. The report also contained snippets about my grandchildren, Liam, 16, and Chloe, 14. Liam was quiet, into computers and coding. Chloe was popular, a cheerleader, deeply enmeshed in her mother's world of social status. They knew almost nothing about me, other than the vague story that their grandfather was a difficult man who had pushed everyone away after their grandmother died. They had fed my grandchildren a poisoned narrative to justify my absence. I closed the folder. The whiskey in my glass had lost its warmth. The last flicker of hope had been snuffed out, replaced by a cold, precise anger. My grief for my lost son was finally truly over. He was gone. In his place was a stranger, a desperate man co-opting my name and my blood for his own selfish ends. My plan began to crystallize, moving from a vague notion of revenge into a detailed, step-by-step blueprint. I wasn't just going to say no. That was too easy. They had built a stage set of a perfect life, and they had invited me to be the star player in their little drama of reconciliation. I decided I would play the part they had written for me. I would be the lonely, forgiving dotard of a father, overflowing with wealth and desperate for their affection. I would let them believe their plan was working. I would let them lead themselves to the gallows. I picked up the phone and made another call, this time to my lawyer. "Jonathan," I said, We need to make some significant changes to my will and the structure of the foundation we discussed, and I need it done before December 24th. The stage was being set. The actors had their scripts. The only thing they didn't know was that I was rewriting the final act. The flight to Daniel City was short, but it felt like a journey across a lifetime. Looking down at the patchwork of lights below, I felt a profound sense of detachment. I wasn't going to see my son. I was going to a business meeting, a high-stakes negotiation where I held all the cards, the love, the pain, the longing. I packed it all away in a lead-lined box in my heart. On the surface, I was just an old man, excited and a little nervous to be seeing his family for Christmas. Daniel was waiting for me at the arrivals gate. He was older, of course, thinner hair, lines of stress around his eyes that his forced smile couldn't hide. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that was probably worth more than my entire wardrobe from a few years ago. He rushed forward and gave me a stiff, awkward hug. It felt like embracing a stranger. "Dad, you made it. It's so good to see you," he said, his voice straining with feigned emotion. "It's good to see you too, son," I replied, letting just the right amount of weary warmth into my own voice. I was playing a role, and I would be damned if I didn't get an award for it. The car, a gleaming black SUV, smelled of new leather and pine-scented air freshener. Daniel kept up a steady stream of chatter on the drive, pointing out landmarks, talking about the city's growth, carefully avoiding any mention of the past 2 decades. He asked about my flight, about my health, about the business, always about the business. Flexicrete, huh? Who would have thought? Concrete. You always did love it, he said with a small, patronizing laugh. It's a good material, I said simply. Solid, dependable. You always know where you stand with it. My words hung in the air between us, a double meaning he was either too obtuse or too focused to catch. The house was exactly as the investigators' photos had depicted, a monument to suburban aspiration. It was a cavernous place with soaring ceilings, a sweeping staircase, and enough beige furniture to sedate a herd of elephants. It was immaculate, impersonal, and felt as warm as a bank lobby. Sarah greeted me at the door. She was still beautiful, but in a brittle, high-maintenance way. Her smile was a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry. She threw her arms around me in an extravagant hug, her perfume cloying and expensive. "Arthur, welcome. We are just so thrilled to have you. The kids are dying to meet you." Her voice was a high melodic flute of practiced charm. And then I saw them, my grandchildren. They stood awkwardly at the back of the foyer, 2 teenagers clearly under duress. Liam, the boy, was tall and lanky, with my dark hair and a shy, intelligent look in his eyes. He clutched his phone like a shield. Chloe, the girl, was the spitting image of a young Sarah, all blonde hair and practiced poise, though her eyes held a flicker of teenage skepticism. "Kids, come say hello to your grandfather," Sarah chirped. They approached. I held out my hand to Liam first. He shook it limply, his eyes downcast. "Hi," he mumbled. Chloe offered a small, rehearsed smile. "It's nice to meet you, Grandpa Arthur." The title sounded foreign and strange on her lips. This was the first moment the lead box in my heart threatened to crack. These were my grandchildren, my blood. They were strangers, taught to think of me as a villain or a ghost. The pain was sharp and real, a sudden, unexpected knife twist. But I pushed it down. I remembered the emails. I remembered the lies. This performance wasn't just for Daniel and Sarah. It was for them, too. They needed to see the truth. Over the next few days, I settled into my role as the prodigal father. I played the part of a slightly frail, lonely old man, overwhelmed by the sudden return to a family setting. I marveled at the size of the house. I complimented Sarah's catered cooking. I listened with rapt attention as Daniel spoke of his big deals that were just about to close. They in turn played their parts to perfection. They were attentive, solicitous, always making sure my glass was full, my chair was comfortable. But their eyes gave them away. I would catch them exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking. I saw Sarah's eyes linger on my watch, a Patek Philippe I'd bought as a gift to myself. I saw Daniel's gaze drift to my briefcase, as if he imagined it was stuffed with stock certificates and bearer bonds. The questions were relentless, always circling back to one subject. You must have a huge team at the company now, Dad, Daniel would say over dinner. It's a good size, I'd reply. A lot of bright young people. And the patents, that must be where the real value is, Sarah would chime in, trying to sound knowledgeable. Intellectual property is everything these days. The lawyers seem to think so, I'd say with a dismissive wave of my hand, as if it were all a bit beyond my comprehension. I let them think I was a simple inventor who'd stumbled into a fortune he didn't quite understand, making me seem both more vulnerable and more loaded than ever. The only genuine moments I had were with Liam. I found him one afternoon in a den, hunched over his laptop, lines of code scrolling across the screen. "What are you working on?" I asked, standing in the doorway. He jumped, startled. "Oh, just a personal project. It's a simulation program for modeling stuff." I walked over and looked at the screen. It was a physics engine, a surprisingly complex one. "Stress and load distribution?" I asked, pointing at a particular algorithm. His eyes widened in surprise. "Yeah, how did you know?" "I was an engineer," I said. "Structures. It's all just math when you get down to it." For 15 minutes, we talked about algorithms and processing speeds. He showed me his work, his shyness replaced by a genuine passion. It was a glimpse of the grandson I might have had, the boy I could have taught, the connection that had been stolen from us both. It strengthened my resolve. He deserved better than this house of cards his parents had built. The day before Christmas Eve, Daniel cornered me in the study. He put on his most serious son-to-father face. "Dad," he began, closing the door, "it's been so amazing having you here. I regret so much time we've lost. I was young and stupid. I hope you can forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive, Daniel," I lied smoothly, patting his arm. "We all make mistakes." "Thanks, Dad," he said, the relief washing over him. "Listen, the reason I wanted to talk, Sarah and I are in a bit of a tight spot, a temporary cash flow issue with a big real estate investment. It's a sure thing, but the capital is tied up. We were wondering if you might be able to help us out with a short-term loan, just to tide us over until it closes in the new year." There it was, the hook in the water, the moment they had been building towards. I looked at him, my face a mask of paternal concern. "A loan? Daniel, you're my son. We're family. We don't do loans." His face fell for a second before I continued. "We'll sort it all out." "Don't you worry about a thing," I said with a conspiratorial wink. "I'm working on something. A Christmas surprise for the whole family. Something permanent. Something that will put all your worries to rest, for good. Just be patient until Christmas morning." His eyes lit up with pure, unadulterated greed. It was dazzling in its intensity. He thought I was talking about an inheritance, a trust fund, a gift of stocks. He thought he had won. "Dad, I don't know what to say," he stammered, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Don't say anything," I said, turning to look out the window at the perfectly manicured lawn. "Just enjoy the holiday. It's going to be a Christmas none of us will ever forget." He left the room practically floating. I stood there watching the pristine suburban scene and felt a cold, clean certainty. The final pieces were in place. The trap was set. All they had to do now was walk into it. Christmas Eve at Daniel and Sarah's house was a spectacle of calculated extravagance. They had invited a dozen or so couples over for a small, intimate cocktail party. These were their friends, the people they were so desperate to impress. The men were all loud and backslapping, wearing expensive watches and talking about their portfolios. The women were rail-thin, dripping with jewelry, their faces tight with a mixture of Botox and social anxiety. I was the guest of honor, the prize pig being paraded around the ring. "Everyone, this is my father, Arthur," Daniel announced with a proprietary arm around my shoulder. "He flew in to spend the holiday with us. It's been too long." A murmur went through the crowd. They all knew who I was. I could see it in their eyes. They weren't looking at me, Arthur Vance, the long-lost father. They were looking at the founder of FlexiCrete, the man from the magazines, the walking, talking bank vault. I played my part. I shook hands, smiled weakly, and accepted their fawning compliments. "We saw the article in Forbes, Arthur. Just incredible," one man boomed. "Sarah tells us you're an absolute genius," a woman purred, her eyes assessing me. I felt like an exhibit in a museum. Daniel and Sarah hovered around me, preening in my reflected glory. They were a king and queen holding court, and I was the crown jewel that legitimized their reign. At one point, I overheard a snippet of conversation between Sarah and one of her friends near the ridiculously oversized Christmas tree. "He's just a sweetheart," Sarah was saying, her voice dripping with false affection. "A bit dottery, you know, but so happy to be here. We're just glad we could, bring him back into the fold. Family is so important." "It's wonderful what you and Daniel are doing," her friend replied, completely oblivious. "And so wonderful for you after all your recent struggles." So they knew. The whole damn town knew they were in trouble. This wasn't just about getting my money. It was about saving face. It was a public relations campaign, and I was the star. Later in the evening, Daniel clinked a glass for a toast. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to him as he stood by the marble fireplace, his arm wrapped possessively around Sarah's waist. "I just want to thank you all for coming," he began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "This Christmas is a very special one for our family. It's a time of healing, of reconciliation. For a long time, there's been a hole in our lives, a missing piece. And now, that piece is here." He raised his glass to me. "To my father, Arthur. Welcome home, Dad. We love you." The room erupted in a chorus of ahs and polite applause. They were eating it up. Daniel caught my eye and gave me a triumphant little nod, as if to say, "See? We did it. We're a family again." I raised my glass in acknowledgement. A serene smile plastered on my face. Inside, a storm of ice was raging. Welcome home. This wasn't a home. It was a stage, a beautifully decorated, hollow, flimsy stage. After the guests had left and the caterers had cleaned up, the five of us sat in the cavernous living room. The fire crackled, casting long shadows on the walls. The air was thick with anticipation. This was it, the final quiet moment before the curtain rose on the main event. "That was a lovely party, Sarah," I said politely. "Oh, it was nothing," she said with a wave of her hand. "Just a few close friends. They were all so excited to meet you." "Dad," Daniel said, leaning forward, his voice low and conspiratorial, "about what you said yesterday, the Christmas surprise. I don't want to seem pushy, but we're just so excited about the future, about being a family again." "Of course," I said, my voice gentle. I looked over at my grandchildren. Chloe was scrolling through photos from the party on her phone, utterly disengaged. Liam was staring into the fire, his expression unreadable. "You know," I began, adopting a tone of wistful reminiscence, "when you were a boy, Daniel, all I ever wanted was to build something that would last. Something for you. Vance and Son Engineering. That was the dream. A legacy." I let a pained expression cross my face. "I failed. I lost it all. I lost the house, and I lost you." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his knee. "Dad, we don't need to talk about that," he started. No, let me finish," I insisted, holding up a hand. "This new venture, FlexiCrete, it's a second chance. A chance to do what I couldn't do before. A chance to build a real legacy for my family, for my grandchildren." I looked directly at Liam and Chloe. "I know you don't know me. That's my fault. But I want to change that. I want to make sure you two are taken care of, that you have every opportunity in the world, that you never have to face the kind of struggles your father and I did." The bait was laid, shimmering and irresistible. Daniel and Sarah exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. This was better than a loan. This was the whole kingdom. "Tomorrow morning," I concluded, my voice thick with manufactured emotion, "we'll open our gifts, and I have one special gift for the whole family. It's not much to look at, just a small box. But what it represents, it's the key to our new future. Together." "We can't wait, Dad," Sarah breathed, her eyes shining with avarice. I bid them good night and went up to my guest room. I closed the door and stood in the darkness for a long moment. I could hear their muffled, excited whispers from downstairs. They were celebrating their victory, counting their chickens, dividing the spoils of a war they thought they had won. I walked to my suitcase and pulled out a small, heavy gift-wrap box. It was wrapped in simple brown paper and tied with a plain white ribbon. It was, as I had told them, not much to look at, but it was the truest thing in that entire house. It was the foundation of the lesson I was about to teach them, a lesson in value, in memory, and in the crushing weight of karma. I placed it on the nightstand, and for the first time in a very long time, I slept like a baby. The performance was over. Tomorrow was Judgment Day. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold. The house was filled with a frantic, joyous energy that felt utterly fraudulent. Chloe and Liam were opening their presents with a practiced enthusiasm, piling up boxes of designer clothes, new electronics, and other expensive trinkets. Sarah was filming it all on her phone, narrating for her social media followers. "Look at Chloe's new handbag. Santa was so good to you. Oh, and Liam's new drone. Amazing!" Daniel played the benevolent patriarch, handing out gifts, his eyes constantly flicking towards me, a greedy impatience barely concealed behind his festive smile. I sat in a large armchair by the fire, sipping my coffee, observing the ritual. I had small token gifts for the kids, a book on programming for Liam, a gift certificate to a bookstore for Chloe. They received them with polite, if unenthusiastic, thanks. Finally, the mountain of wrapping paper had been cleared away, and the last of the presents were opened. All except one. The small, heavy box wrapped in brown paper that I had placed under the tree. "Well," Daniel said, rubbing his hands together, "it looks like there's one last gift. From you, Dad." He retrieved the box and held it with a theatrical reverence. "You said this one was for the whole family." "That's right," I said, my voice calm and steady. The room fell quiet. Even the teenagers looked up from their new toys, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Sarah had her phone out, no doubt ready to capture the moment her financial worries were solved forever. "You really hyped this one up, Arthur," Sarah said with a light, tinkling laugh. "We're all on the edge of our seats." "Come here, Daniel," I said, patting the space on the ottoman in front of me. "Open it here, with me." He sat down, placing the box on his lap. He looked at me, his eyes wide with anticipation. He was like a child, but not with the innocent wonder of Christmas. It was the feverish excitement of a gambler about to turn over the winning card. He carefully untied the ribbon and tore away the paper. Inside was a simple, unvarnished wooden box. No lock. He lifted the lid. For a moment, he just stared, his smile frozen on his face, his brow furrowed in confusion. What is it?" Sarah asked, craning her neck to see. Daniel reached into the box and lifted out the contents. It was a set of old, tarnished brass house numbers, a 4, a 2, and a 7. He held them in his palm, the metal dull and pitted with age. "I don't understand," he whispered, looking from the numbers to my face. "Do you remember them, Daniel?" I asked, my voice soft, but carrying across the silent room. 427 Elm Street, our old house, the one I built, the one you grew up in. I went back there, a few weeks after the foreclosure. The new owners were renovating. They were throwing them out. I kept them. It was all I had left of that home. The confusion on his face was slowly being replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. Sarah had stopped filming. "For 20 years, I continued, my voice gaining strength. "You told me that I gambled everything away, that I lost our home, and you were right. I did. But a home is more than bricks and mortar, Daniel. It's about family. It's about support. It's about being there during the hard times, not just showing up for the good ones." I stood up, my old bones protesting, but my spirit feeling stronger than it had in decades. I began to pace in front of the fireplace, the paterfamilias finally delivering his sermon. "You didn't call me because you missed me. You called me because you're drowning. I know about the 2 mortgages, Daniel. I know about the leased cars and the maxed-out credit cards. I know about the unpaid country club dues. I know you haven't closed a deal in 2 years. I know this entire house, this entire life, is a stage set you can no longer afford." Sarah let out a small gasp. Daniel's face had gone from tan to a pasty white. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "You saw an article in a magazine, and you saw Lifeline," I said, my voice rising with righteous anger. "You saw an old, lonely man you could manipulate. You rehearsed your apology, You coached your children, and you put on this disgusting play, all in the hopes that I would sign a check and bail you out of the consequences of your own vanity and greed. I stopped and looked at Sarah, whose face was a mask of fury and humiliation. And you. He's an old man. Old men are lonely. You told your son he was my only heir. You thought my love was something to be leveraged, a commodity to be cashed in. You have taught my grandchildren that family is a transaction. I turned my attention to Liam and Chloe, who were staring at their parents with wide, shocked eyes. Kids, I'm sorry you have to see this. Your father and I, we have a long and painful history, but the story you were told is not the truth. I was not a difficult man who pushed people away. I was a broken man, grieving his wife, abandoned by his only son when he needed him most. Finally, I turned back to Daniel. He was still sitting on the ottoman, the brass numbers clutched in his hand, his head bowed in shame. You asked me for a loan yesterday, I said, my voice now cold and final. I told you we don't do loans in this family, and I told you I was giving you something permanent, something to put your worries to rest. This is it, Daniel. I pointed to the numbers in his hand. This is your inheritance, a reminder of what you truly lost. It wasn't the house. It was your integrity. It was your honor. It was us. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle into the suffocating silence. The money, Sarah finally choked out, her voice a venomous hiss. What are you doing with the money? A slow, grim smile spread across my face. This was the masterstroke, the part of the plan that had brought me the most satisfaction to arrange. The money is where it should be, I said. It's building a true legacy, not for you, but in honor of the one person in our family who was pure and good, the woman whose memory you both desecrated with your greed. Yesterday, my lawyers finalized the paperwork. My entire fortune, every single share of my company, every dollar in my accounts has been placed into an irrevocable charitable trust. The Eleanor Vance Foundation. The name hung in the air like a final judgment. The Eleanor Vance Foundation. Daniel looked up, his face a canvas of disbelief and horror. A charity? You gave it all to a charity. Not just any charity, I corrected him, savoring the moment. A foundation dedicated to what your mother always valued most, education and honest, hard work. The foundation will provide full scholarships for underprivileged students to study engineering and structural design at the university. It will build things that last. It will support young people who have nothing but their minds and their ambition. It will create a legacy of strength and integrity. Everything that I failed to build with you. Sarah let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. You can't do that. He's your son. They're your grandchildren. You owe them. Owe them, I roared, my voice echoing in the cavernous room. I owed your husband my love and support, and I gave it to him for 25 years. He threw it back in my face the moment things got hard. I owed my grandchildren a grandfather, a role I was denied for their entire lives because you fed them lies to cover your own cruelty. The only debt in this room is the one you owe to your creditors, and that bill, I'm afraid, is now due. The finality in my voice was absolute. This was not a negotiation. It was a declaration. Daniel finally seemed to understand. He slumped forward, the brass numbers falling from his limp hand and clattering onto the expensive hardwood floor. The sound was like a gavel falling. I need to leave, I announced to the silent, shattered room. I have a car waiting to take me to the airport. I turned to my grandchildren. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide. Chloe looked terrified. Liam, however, was looking at me, and for the first time I saw something other than suspicion in his eyes. It was a flicker of understanding, maybe even respect. Liam. Chloe, I said, my voice softening. None of this is your fault. Your parents made their choices. Now you will have to make yours. My contact information is with my lawyer. If, when you are adults and on your own 2 feet, you ever wish to know your grandfather, the door will be open. But it is a door you must walk through on your own. I walked to the foyer to retrieve my coat. Daniel didn't move. Sarah was openly weeping now, not tears of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated rage. As I put on my coat, she shot up from the couch. You monster, she hissed, her face contorted. You cruel, vindictive old man. I hope you die alone. I have been alone for 20 years, Sarah, I said, looking her dead in the eye. The difference is, I've made my peace with it. You two are just beginning to understand what true loneliness is. It's being surrounded by people in a house you can't afford, with a reputation you can't maintain, and having absolutely no one to turn to because you've shown everyone your true face. I opened the front door. The cold December air felt clean and fresh. Before I stepped out, I heard a voice behind me. Grandpa. I turned. It was Liam. He had followed me into the foyer. He stood there looking awkward and uncertain. He wasn't holding his phone. The physics engine I'm building, he said, his voice quiet. I based some of the core logic on a paper I read about material fatigue. The author, his name was Arthur Vance. My heart, that old tired organ, skipped a beat. He had known. On some level, he had sought me out in the only way he could. It was a good paper, I said, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time that day. He just nodded, a universe of unspoken words passing between us. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion. It was just a connection, a single sturdy beam in a house that had otherwise collapsed. I walked out the door and didn't look back. As the car pulled away from the curb, I saw the faces of Daniel and Sarah's friends and neighbors who had been drawn out of their houses by the sounds of shouting. They were standing on their perfect lawns, staring at the perfect house where the perfect family was imploding. The public humiliation, the final brick in the wall of their karma, was already beginning. The fortune was gone. The family I had was gone. But as the car headed toward the airport, I didn't feel loss. I felt a sense of rightness, of balance. Eleanor's name would now be a force for good in the world, and a young man with my blood in his veins and an engineer's mind in his head knew my name. It wasn't the legacy I had planned, but it was a foundation I could build on, a foundation of truth. And unlike concrete, truth, I had learned, never cracks under pressure. So that's what happened. Karma, you see, isn't some mystical force. It's just the bill for your life's choices coming due. Daniel and Sarah lost the house, of course. Their friends abandoned them, and their world of smoke and mirrors vanished overnight. They had to face the consequences of a life lived on credit and lies. I hear they're living in a small apartment now, the kind I lived in for all those years. I don't take any joy in that, but I do take satisfaction in knowing the truth came out. The Eleanor Vance Foundation awarded its first 10 scholarships last month. I was there, seeing the faces of those bright, deserving kids. That felt like a real fortune. That felt like home. I still haven't heard from Daniel, but a few weeks ago I got an email with the subject line, Physics Engine Question. It was from Liam. We've been talking. It's a start. What would you have done in my shoes? Was I too cruel? Was it justice? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I read them all, and if this story resonated with you, if you believe in truth and tough lessons, please do me a favor and hit that like button. Share it with someone who might appreciate it, and if you want to hear more stories from a life that's been anything but boring, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening. A&H Ho. So.